Romanticism, with the big R, is something that is a subject that takes place in everyday life, from TVs to movies to music. There's many things that have been taken from Romanticism, such as Frankenstein, the Byronic hero, and many other things. Frankenstein has been known to be an amazing keystone book into most of romantic literature, due to the fact that it covers an argumentative piece of science versus nature. However, I do suggest that Frankenstein actually covers human nature more than science. Science is the basis of which the subject takes place upon. However, the consequences only come from how humans interact with one another. Iron Fist modernizes Frankenstein for the newer audiences, and it's amazing how so many little details can improve upon the story and give you a little feeling of excitement if you know what to look for. Now, what happens in the story is Danny reappears after 15 years to find out answers as to why his plane crashed. With his parents dead, he had originally been in a mountain. Danny came back from the mountain after living with monks from a place called Kunlun, which is a part of the lower part of heaven in this scripture. Now Danny comes back as the Iron Fist. The Iron Fist is somebody with mystical powers that basically has a glowing yellow fist that can punch through pretty much anything. Now when he comes back, he talks with Ward and Joy Meacham, expecting to find, however, Harold Meacham, who we find out at this point is dead from cancer, which sucks. However, as many normal people would be, skeptical about somebody who shows up at a Fortune 500 company as a person who may own 51% of the company, Ward and Joy Meacham basically don't believe him and kick him out. When Danny comes back and Joy and Ward actually recognize Danny as Danny, there's a little bit of sparks flying in the air when he does get back on the board. He has some different ideas from the business ways that Ward and Joy have originally set up. Now, this could be from selling drugs at cost where there's no profit, or trying to make sure that those that have been near their power plants that may have gotten cancer from them are taken care of. In the end, Danny is in New York basically to find out answers about why his plane crashed and to defeat an organization called the Black Hand. In the meanwhile, Danny meets that deal drugs, human trafficking, etc., etc. His partner, both romantically and in a superhero fashion. Danny ends up kidnapping a high-ranking member of the Hand and forcing her to tell him the truth about what she knows about the Black Hand and anything about his parents' death. But in this process, Danny ends up revealing that he has some major anger issues and that Colleen gets poisoned. Now, Danny ends up calling on Colleen's sensei, and who's her teacher. During this time, the sensei teaches Danny how to use his powers in another different application, and then it ends up treating Colleen. Through this use of teaching Danny, gains his trust, and ends up bringing him back to his base of operations, which Colleen comes along and they end up getting along together. However, Colleen betrays Danny by revealing that she is a part of the Hand, something that Danny is sworn to defeat and kill. Obviously, Danny gets pretty upset by this and ends up escaping. After the fact, Colleen ends up getting expelled from the Hand and goes on a little bit of an exile. When Danny finds out about this, he comes back to talk. He needs a partner. Danny ends up fighting Colleen's sensei with her and ends up killing him. However, in the process, he learns that Harold has been keeping a secret from him and calls up the CSI to keep Danny away from him and basically everybody in New York. However, in the end, Ward and Danny, even though they have a tricky past with Ward being a childhood bully, end up helping one another, where Danny wants to get revenge and kill Harold. Ward instead takes that upon himself. Now, going into Ward's background, Ward begins the story off by being with his sister, Joy Meacham. They are kind of like yin and yang, but more towards Ward, you see him as a cool, calm, collected being. He's got his suit and tie on, his hair is done up nicely. He's, as you can see, he looks in charge of himself. When we see him as a smart leader as well, instead of believing that Danny is there with him, in front of him, he thinks it's been 15 years, he could be a corporate spy. But when Danny kidnaps Ward, Ward does something that most sane, controlled people would do in a situation like that. They would wait for a moment and reach for the gun and try and protect themselves. Unfortunately, Danny knows martial arts, so that doesn't work out too well for him, and instead he goes with plan B, which is talk to him and see if he can get him the answers that he wants to let him go. Send a hit out on Danny, one way or another, whether it's to beat him up or to kill him. We see that Ward is a little bit ruthless. The hit inevitably fails, though. He ends up contacting Harold Meacham, his dad, who, according to the rest of the world, had died 3 years prior of cancer. Well, Harold is alive due to the fact of the Hand, which gave him immortality, basically. But every time he dies, he comes back. He does die, though. Harold has only Ward and the Hand to know about him. They are the only ones that know about him. And according to Hammond, Victor Frankenstein's work lacks democracy and transparency. The seclusion renders him socially isolated. In the same case, Ward is socially isolated from the rest of the world because he has this fact that his dad is alive, he's well, and he's a bit of a dick. To be honest, he really is. We see that Ward gets ordered about a lot to do some really crafty things which aren't good for most people's mentalities. At first, he's able to put up with it really well. However, once it gets a little bit darker, whether it's getting rid of some dead bodies, we see Ward's mental state cracking a little. And thanks to Harold working in secret, we see another quote from Hammond saying, "Working in secrecy causes terrible destruction. that is no unfortunate accident, but rather the product of his self-centered, ambitious, unreflecting, and irresponsible actions. You can see this within Harold. He's working in secret to build his own company, to make it his again, even though he is dead to the rest of the world. He's not there. He's still looking, however, to make it the best and make the most money and just make it his. The reason why this is being spoke about is because Ward and Harold are also kind of like yin and yang, where one is the monster, one is Frankenstein. But it also flips around and the other becomes Frankenstein while the other becomes the monster. At first, Harold is Frankenstein. He's smart, cool, calm, collected, and very analytical, very amoral. He doesn't care what anybody else thinks. He's gonna do his best so his stuff succeeds. He leaves Ward kind of like an abusive father, where he says he loves him, but then ends up punching him in the gut. It doesn't send the right signals. He takes him for granted and doesn't actually care for Ward, thus leaving him in a little bit of a tough spot to wrap around mentally. That Ward doesn't really see eye to eye with Harold, and so when Harold does order him to work in a certain way, he ignores him and goes the opposite way. Kind of like Danny in the episode, in the second episode, is sent to a psychiatric hospital, and to get him out, Harold says to protect him. Ward does not protect Danny. He in fact sends a hit on him again to take care of him, this time good and proper. Still, it does not work. Another way that Ward kind of relates to the monster is something that his sister says. She says, "You've got your look, sweaty, scowly, stick up your ass thing." That to me sounds like, if she hadn't said it in a very joking manner, sounds like she's calling him an ugly son of a gun. And that's not a good thing. Much kind of like how Frankenstein's monster is made out of dead body parts. Totally relatable to see how Frankenstein's book, or it's totally relatable to see how Frankenstein's monster at this point kind of resembles Ward. Much like the monster when he first begins, Ward is a little bit innocent as well. While he's okay with putting a hit for somebody else to kill Danny, when he himself looks at dead bodies which Harold has killed and is trying to cover up, Ward can't really do it himself. He gets queasy looking at Harold busting teeth out of some dead corpses. Slowly over time, Ward loses his humanity. He loses his sanity. The more that he listens to his father, the more that he becomes less of a human. And you can see him deal with this by overdosing on the pills that he's taking. By taking them with alcohol, he's causing himself harm. During the time that he ODs, lightning strikes in the background. You hear the thunder, And this is kind of like how in quite a few modern tales of Frankenstein, the lightning strikes and life is born. Unfortunately, this is the point where Ward fully starts becoming the monster. His appearance starts slipping, his hair is messed up, his clothes are wrinkled, he goes without half the suit, it's untucked, it's unkempt. He's starting to become more ugly, more monstrous. Joy's there with him and says, "You're scaring me." That in itself says something tremendous, because it's her brother. Because it's her brother from the beginning of her life, the one that she knows basically the best in the world, her comfort, and it scares her. It just speaks volumes about Ward and his moment. When Harold was taking care of the bodies, he does it in a scientific manner and then orders Ward to take care of them. At that point, Ward basically cracks completely. He's gone. He wants to get away from the abuse of his father. And when he does try to, at least, his father denies him that. Ward just has had enough. When Harold orders him to do another task, he snaps, he grabs a knife, and Harold's dead. At this moment, Harold was Victor Frankenstein. Ward has now become the monster. However, the good point is, it starts flipping around. Because later on, Harold wakes up from the middle of a lake and acts exactly how the monster does in the very beginning of Frankenstein, when the monster first awoke. Harold comes from the lake crawling on his hands and knees, unable to speak, and as he looks up, it seems to be in wonder. And we start to see Harold come to a we see Harold come to a fire hydrant that's spouting out water with a bunch of children, and he goes up, toddling like a toddler, to test and feel the water, and he has a hard time speaking, almost like a stroke victim. He continues on to a park where he sticks his hand in boiling water of a hot dog stand, and he learns that water can be hot, and throws up the muck inside of him. I think that kind of symbolizes a moment where everything becomes clear to him. Pick up with Harold. Then we pick up with Harold coming to find his assistant. Who comes to pick him up and offers him his regular drink, which he ends up throwing out the window and asking for bourbon. Now, this is Harold, the scientist, the analytical man. He throws his old life away and accepts the new one with drink in hand and monstrous eyes. This all culminates when Ward comes back to see Harold alive. And Ward's shocked. I mean, anybody would be. He's back from the dead again. Harold then asks Ward, quote, "Am I a monster, Ward?" And Ward answers, "Yes, definitely." At this point, Harold says that Harold basically says that he destroyed everything that ever mattered to him, and that Ward is his son and he loves him, which is kind of screwed up since he's beaten on him, he's ordered him to do his dirty work, literally ordered him to kill. It's really screwed up of Harold to say that. And in that way, he's a monster. He has become the monster. I mean, and this way it's flipped. We have Victor Frankenstein and his monster. Now we have his monster and another monster. It goes to show, according to Hammond, Victor is driven by a desire for social gain and glory. He becomes a monster in his obsessive, alienated drive for success. And in his abandonment and subsequent treatment of the being the monster, who becomes a murderous monster. This monster becomes who Harold is as well, because of his obsessiveness for gain. He ends up destroying himself in the process of destroying his own son. He's a monster by being manipulative and smart. Even when Ward wants to go after the fact that he's able to be set free and finds out that he's alive, he then drags him back in by manipulating him for the safety of his sister Joy. And he shows off his murderous, monster-like attitude by killing his assistant, who had been nothing but help to him. But what really shows that Harold has completely gone to the monstrous side is that his favourite child is Joy. And before, he wouldn't meet with Joy because he wanted to protect her. Now he doesn't care. He wants what he wants. He brings Joy to meet him, and then they create a father-daughter duo that, if she doesn't do as he says, he gets mad. Again, much like an abusive parent. Another portion of evidence is Harold pushes Danny, the innocent, naive boy, to go for the kill, to get rid of some of the people in the hand, and smiles sarcastically, kind of indifferently and sadistically, all at the same time, to know that he's succeeded. He's creating another monster. Ward, after some events, basically end up dealing with the hand by making a deal to kill Harold and to save Joy. But in the process, kinda like how Victor had focused just on the monster on the wedding night, he ended up accidentally hurting Joy by the hand shooting her in the stomach. In Frankenstein, the wife dies because the monster did it. This time, the monster caused the damage through a third party. This basically all accumulates at the point where Harold sets up the FBI to kick Danny out of New York, put him on the most wanted list. And this is really special because Harold treated Danny like a son, like his second son, although in a much kinder fashion. At which point, Danny finds out that Harold killed his parents. He's the one that set up the plane to crash, which understandably drives Danny to go for the revenge to kill Harold. During the final scene, Danny doesn't. He kind of forgives him And as Harold goes to shoot Danny, well, Ward does his final act as a monster. He ends up shooting Harold over the edge of the building, thus saving Danny from scarring himself from murder. Now, what's the take on all this? I mean, Frankenstein is old and kind of boring to some people, but it's alive and well in today's world. The romanticism is thriving. You get little pictures, if you have read the story, of you get little hints, Easter eggs, into what's going to happen. During the series, you see multiple times that when Harold calls Ward, he's nicknamed him Frank N. Stein, literally Frankenstein, and that gives a big hint to, well, Harold is scientific. He's the scientist. He's the one that's causing the monster to be built. But which one's the monster? Well, the only person that he has contact with most of the time to the outside world is Ward. So you have Ward becoming the monster for him. You see a header hand. It is a big foreshadowing moment that Ward's gonna do something and it's not gonna be good. This all plays off the innocence of a child, which it was a big portion of romanticism. It was also nature, and there's multiple instances of these two facts in the show. I take in consideration that the child is Ward as he grows up. As he goes on in the show, you see that he's kind of innocent. He doesn't like dead bodies. He doesn't want to get rid of them. But his father forces him to grow up, to take on those facts and give him a good life because of his love. Nature, on the other hand, it's New York. You get to see parts of it. Some of it's green, some of it's good. And then you have the weather, in the instance of the lightning. That in itself symbolizes a shocking moment, literally, and the creation of life. A terrible one, a monstrous one. And that's how Frankenstein is connected to Iron Fist. But how does it connect to the class? Well, we can see how Frankenstein gives hints to what the story holds, but also the modern take on it. I mean, back then it was science, like the battle of science versus nature, and the effect of humans on that. Well, the story holds true for today. Even in modern times, with more science and less nature, based on humans' emotions and human interactions, that's what we can take away from it. If you ignore somebody and treat them terribly, then they're gonna grow up and be terrible themselves. If you treat them kindly and amazingly, then they themselves will become amazing. Treat technology that way, and you have the exact same things. So it shows a good lesson onto, even in today's world, human interactions is what makes the world go round, makes it as crappy as it is, but also as beautiful as it is.